Good morning. I'm just testing the microphone by saying good morning, but I would also like to, because you know it's morning already, yeah. I'd also like to thank the organizers, which they've been terrific in enabling this to happen so quickly, so efficiently, so that's a big plus. I felt very looked after, and I've spoken to other contributors, and they've also felt the same, so thanks very much. Fantastic welcome from Uruguay. Now, it's great to see so much of what I was going to talk about already done, in some ways. But the Ellen MacArthur Foundation can cope with that. And in fact, it's a lovely thing to cope with. So I was going to start off actually with a couple of thoughts about the history of this sort of idea and why it perhaps has got some traction now. Why now? Before I get on with some of the details. And I think I'd like to call out a few people, who they're not here necessarily, but some people who really helped bring this sort of thinking along over the past few decades. And the first one I'd like to mention is somebody who was connected with UNIDO some years ago, part of the pair of, if you like, evangelists for designing a system which works, which was Michael Braungart and William McDonough, famous for their cradle-to-cradle design philosophy. And it was very influential, and it still is. I'm going to a congress of theirs in November, or at least Michael Braungart's congress. And the big insight there was that you have to design production to enable it to be circular. You can't just take, as the representative said a little earlier, you can't take a linear economy and just bash it into shape, because it has to be by intention and design. Now that's both a wonderful opportunity for designers, for manufacturers to think differently, for how you relate to customers and users, but it also is an incredible challenge. Because if you were, for instance, designing for disassembly, designing so the product can be easily taken apart, that's a real challenge. And you've also got to answer the question, who's taking it apart? Is it the original firm? Is it third-party people? Who is doing the taking apart? And then what do you do with the materials and the products and the components? That's one person I'd like to call out, Michael Braungart. The second one is Amory Lovins, who again has been working in this area for, under different names for decades. Amory Lovins, part of the Rocky Mountain Institute. His book, Natural Capitalism, with a couple of other folks, Natural Capitalism was hugely influential because it said we're not just talking about resource productivity. He was saying it's also got to include, and this is 1999, a shift from products to services. We've already heard a little bit about that. He said we've got to rebuild natural capital, because if you rebuild natural capital, like soils, forests, and whatever, you get more output over a longer period of time, so it's not just being nice to the environment, it's very practical. He also said that we've got to create a different way of looking at waste. Waste as a concept should be removed. Waste should be food. It should be seen of, as the biomimicry expert Janine Benyus said, it's got to be food for the system. And beyond that, she said something else which is very important, which I think we'll pick up as we go through, is that we have to feed the forest to feed the trees. Now you might say, why bother with a silly, strange metaphor like that? But it's actually very important because contemporary economics tends to think of big trees are better. And if you ask a child to draw a tree, they've got the little cloud, which is all the leaves, they've got the trunk, but they don't usually draw many roots. Some do, but most don't. It's as though the tree could live by itself. Now, everybody knows it doesn't live on itself, by itself. It depends on a whole context. And yet we forget that when it comes to the economy as a whole. We keep forgetting that if the whole system is thriving, the individual, whether it's a big tree, a small tree, or a mushroom, or an insect, will be thriving as well. In some ways, somebody told me the other day that they see the circular economy as essentially an attempt to fit the economy to nature, not to try and fit nature into the economy. They also said something very useful, and I think picks up with the ambition in Uruguay, which is, if we think of knowledge plus waste, we will get an asset as a result. It is about a knowledge-based future, but applying our knowledge to what we now call waste to not only minimize it, that's okay, but to design out that concept so that anything that does come out of a company is not zero, but is positive. Now, how does that link to the forest? Well, what happens in nature? The idea is be generous. Anything that's coming in or moving through is food for something else. I started with Michael Braungart, and I'll finish this little preamble with him too. He uses the story of the cherry tree to illustrate. He says, if you go to Japan in the spring, it's full of cherry trees with all the blossom. Now, which one of the economists or others would like to say those trees are wasteful? How much blossom does it take just to create enough attraction for some insect to come and create a few new cherry trees via the fruit and the seed? And the answer, of course, is it's an abundance. Nature can be abundant. It becomes food for the rest of the system. And in doing that, you don't have a problem with waste. What you do have is a transfer between the tree, the context, which is the soils, and it is not the tree that feeds the tree, is it? The tree feeds the soils, which then feeds the tree. And so one of the key things which are not in my slide set today is this notion that the first educational imperative around a circular economy is something which I call systems thinking, other people call approach to contemporary science, which is trying to understand systems which haven't got determinism in them. They're non-linear systems, they're like living systems. But it's understanding bigger picture, longer term, and the connections. And I was speaking in Brazil last week. I haven't had a big flight, don't worry, I'm not jet lagged. There are other problems, but not that. I was speaking, and afterwards a student came up to me because I'd said, I'm a generalist. And at the moment I'd said, being a generalist makes you get questioned at meetings. If you're a generalist, what are you doing here? What are you a specialist in? And you feel really ashamed. That has got to stop. Because systems thinkers are generalists. They might have a speciality too, but what they're really good at is drawing in relevant knowledge and connections in order to solve what is a systemic problem. Your problem isn't the car, it's mobility. Your problem isn't a little gadget, it's how that fits within the system. So being a generalist is one of the things for the future. And if Uruguay's interested in how you adapt to a circular economy, I would say try and promote more systemic thinking. Get beyond the boundaries, get beyond the disciplines. Don't abandon them, but it's the context which gives meaning. Okay, so now on to the core bit. I'm obviously very good at Spanish, so I'll try and remember what this says. Yes. Oh yes, the linear economy is ripe for disruption. I'm just going to make 5 points in my core part because I've only got a very short time and I've used quite a bit of it. It's ripe for disruption, and it's not just the familiar things we've heard about, though there are a couple of examples here. In Europe, the typical car is parked 92% of the time. Go figure. Even residential houses, 50% of people, I don't know if I believe this, 50% of people say they report living in too much space. But I'd rather believe the one on the top, that 60% of European offices are not used even in working hours. There's a huge lack of utilization in vehicles, in buildings, and we know the issues around food waste, where about 30% it never reaches its true destination. But there are other things. You'll appreciate this is a fairly common theme, that where are we going to get all the basic materials from? And this is a chart that says if you were born in 2010, how long will it last for me? How much is left for me? And you can see that there are some boundaries coming up. Now, of course, human ingenuity is really good, and we can substitute some materials for others, but for yet others, there's a real problem about meeting that challenge. And so moving towards a circular economy where we emphasize use and reuse and recovery is important. This is plastics, just in case you thought it was already being solved. Far from it. This is the flow of plastics through the system, and closed-loop recycling is a tiny, tiny part of that. A little bit more is recovered through cascaded recycling, but most is lost. And that's a loss in value. That's the key thing to bring out there. That material wasn't created for free, and it shouldn't be a cost on the environment. It should be something productive. Okay, we need a prosperity which is regenerative by design. That means we have to look after natural capital. And how do we do that? Well, it's been mentioned already, so I can go quickly, is that we need to be able to be regenerative and restorative by moving from take, make, and dispose. And that is by, as I've already mentioned, by design. But it's not an easy thing to do. Imagine your food industry. If it's orientated toward exports, that material is not coming back. It just isn't. So how could we improve the quality of the natural capital, the soils, by perhaps adopting different farming techniques? But some things are really, really quite difficult to do. And this diagram, lovingly called the butterfly diagram, because it sort of looks like a butterfly. It's got the linear economy down the middle, and it's got all of the potential feedback loops. And Michael Braungart, because I started with him, has really helped us because he brought first into clarity the idea that there should be two types of material flow. Because consumption is what humans do, and everything in the living world consumes. To consume means to destroy, to make less ordered. And things which are suited to consumption, they're going to be consumed. So the food, the biological materials, but at each stage, what value can we get from them? It's fairly familiar. But the key point is that it has to close the loop. So you've got slow down, in other words, take more time to get the value at each stage, because if you take the time, there is more value to be had as things get more disordered. But in the end, it has to loop back. So you slow the flow and you close the loop. The same thing on this side. Where is the value for business? This diagram was originally done in this form by Martin Stuckday, who worked with McKinsey. And he was doing it to illustrate where the extra value is. And it's not, as we've heard, it's not in recycling. As we've already heard, the extra value is in those other loops, the tighter loops. The closer it is to the middle, the potential for more value there is. Look at our reports if you need some examples. So, whereas we have to rebuild capital with the biological cycle, we have to try and maintain capital here, manufactured capital. So the more we can extend product life, provide access rather than ownership, the more we can recover, repair, and all of that before we have to recycle, the better it is for the economy. And I think this is very salutary, because if product is designed to be put into use in a different way, you won't have as much trouble when it comes to the time when it needs to be recycled as a material. So maintain order, maintain the value, please, if we can. And this is a guide to materials, of course, but circularity itself, this notion of a feedback-rich system, can also apply to other aspects of the economy, potentially money flows, potentially knowledge and learning. It is representative of a way of looking at how the world works. Oh, too far. Here are the three principles, very simple. And that's what's quite good about the circular economy. It's intuitive enough to say, yeah, I get that, but challenging enough to say, now how do I make that work for me? But at least it's a useful guide, and I keep going back to this one at the end. If we can't, in Uruguay or elsewhere, regenerate natural capital, all we're really doing is running down the system a little bit more slowly. So it's not just resource productivity, it's closing the loop as well as slowing the flow. Right. Well, why has it all come to be like this? Already hinted at. It's the digital revolution which has changed the possibilities of how people, materials, whether you're a consumer or a user, how all of those things relate. This has given new energy, if you like, to old ideas around, because there's always been renting, there's always been leasing, there's always been consumption and recycling. But now that we can track where materials go, we can keep a track on them in use, how is that washing machine performing? That's easily possible now. Is there a problem building up in this engine? We can track that. We know where the stuff is and what condition it is, and that means we can, when we withdraw it from the cycle again, choose those things with the highest value. There are many aspects of slowing the flow of resources result from the digital revolution. I think I'd just come out and say it, we wouldn't be talking about a circular economy if it wasn't for the digital possibilities, because it allows a lot more innovation to come through. Here's just a few examples. You'll have to read that in English because the diagram was integrated in some way that we couldn't get at. But you can probably guess it. It's, for instance, improving traffic flow, reducing congestion, tracking assets, saving time, energy-saving streetlights, all sorts of things that have been on the go for a while. But I just want to report two studies, one from Lisbon. Lisbon has calculated that in an era where their autonomous vehicles are common and they have an integrated transport system, they'll only need 29% of the vehicles they have now. And a Rethink X report for the US condition thought that cars could go down from around 274 million to 47 by about 2035. And I just read in the newspaper today that Jaguar Land Rover are not going to be, a bit ironic considering they built a new diesel engine factory, but they're not going to be doing diesels. They're going to only be doing hybrids or electric in quite a limited, about 5 years from now. So things are rapidly on the move thanks to digital, and it's the combination of the technologies which will change our cities. It will change what the meaning of work is. It will change how we relate to products and services. So, just a few things there which include agricultural system, regenerative agriculture, knowledge sharing, and so on. Urban and peri-urban farming. Fourth one, benefits for the environment, for society as a whole. Now, where does the society benefits come from? Because some people are pointing to, oh, Industrial 4.0, oh, automation, AI. That doesn't sometimes sound very people-friendly. Might be much more efficient production. But if you're no longer, say you're a truck driver, and autonomous trucks are already beginning to be tested, you might not be needed, or only one of you instead of 6 of you are needed. Now, driving vehicles in America is one of their biggest occupations for non-specialist manual labor among men. So what's going to happen? And in a way, the circular economy isn't a panacea. It doesn't answer that question very well. What it does say is that if you've got more loops of material and product, more locally, more regionally, there are job opportunities in there. And the only big claim it makes is this. If a circular economy reduces the cost of access or ownership to goods and services, that will allow more spending in the economy to lead to more economic growth. Now, about half of you have immediately spotted that that could mean more environmental damage because they've got some more spending power. The assumption must be, if it's going to work, that the economy as a whole is moving towards circularity, so that, as Michael Braungart says, the additional spending isn't on things which make it worse, but it's on products and services which are designed to fit the system. Because his dream, of course, is that the world is more abundant. It's more like a healthy forest. It's not about scarcity and squeezing people. It's about designing a system that fits. A couple of examples just to round off. Renault remanufacturing plant outside Paris, Choisy. They're one of the most profitable plants they have. They have even taken over some recycling firms in order to get a better stream of products, not all of which are Renault. There's an example of systems thinking. They're fixing up other people's gearboxes and steering racks. Somebody more, not local, but in Latin America, Native produce, this Leontino Balbo, on a very large scale. They produce organic sugar. But his quest over 17 years was to find a way of doing monocultures while bringing the soil back to top quality. It's easy to track down what he's done, but he has succeeded in doing it. Okay, it's not as diverse as it would be if it was forest, but hey, it's doing a lot in terms of cutting down the inputs, cutting down the problems that come with pests, and it's a very interesting example of attempting regenerative agriculture. But notice it was knowledge he needed. Okay, and money, yeah. But it was knowledge. That was the difference. It wasn't some, oh, I've got a new chemical, I've got a new type of sugar cane. It was thinking the system through and experimenting and being told by scientists this won't work. But he knew it took time for the soils to come right. So sometimes there might be an element of courage in there to get beyond the conventional wisdom and keep pushing until you get it right. Tesla, most people know about them now. They're not out about selling you cars alone. They're after sustainable mobility. They're after connecting your car to your roof for electric power. They're about your car going off and doing some work for you while you go to work. They're about these cars being available as shared items. A whole new world is building out. Okay, it starts with the rich. I can't afford one of these. I can't afford a second-hand one. But it has changed the way we see the automobile market. This again is for high-end people. This is don't buy furniture, just rent it per month over a year or less. So you can move into your new apartment and just have it fitted out. And then when you move after a year, they just take it away. But you'd have to be quite well off to do it. This is the same with gadgets. Gadgets, electronic things change so quickly. The idea is you try it for a month. And if you want to continue renting it, you can. If you decide to buy, they'll give you a discount in it over the period of time that you're renting. So it's a way of trying, using for a short time, and then putting it back in the system. And so, in a way, it's supposed to be an attempt to give an inspiring idea of the economy of the future. And its key thought, to go back to the beginning, is it's by design and intention. It's about different ways of designing products and services. It's most meant to work at all scales. Lots of challenges at that. It's about making sure that waste is food. And also, though I haven't mentioned it, a key one is it's about a shift to renewables. You can't do this and assume a fossil fuel-run world. There are events happening now which give us a hint about long-term trends in the climate. And so circular economy is part of a shift in thinking. It's not an answer to all your problems. You can't take it off the supermarket shelf and say, I think I'll do circular economy this week. It's not how things work. But there is opportunity there for those who want to chase it, and it's led by business and economic ideas which spin off environmental and social benefits if we do it right. Okay, so I'm sure lots of people will fill in other presentations, all of the exciting developments they've been involved in, but thank you for your attention.